Welcome back, guys. I'm Matt.
And I'm Micah, and today we'll be discussing the amazing movie, The Phantom Menace.
This almost Academy Award-winning movie was directed by George Lucas and stars Jake Lloyd, Ewan McGregor, Liam Neeson, and Natalie Portman.
The movie that Star Wars fans were eagerly anticipating for 20 years was about increased taxation and trade blockades, leading two Jedis to instigate a galactic war and discover a young slave boy who they steal away from his slave mother to make him a Jedi. All the while, a sinister individual is pulling the puppet strings on both sides of the Republic and Trade Federation to fulfill his own narrative. All right, Matt, so let's talk about obviously the best Star Wars movie in the universe. I think just in terms of amazing movies, The Phantom Menace is up there with Citizen Kane, Green Mile,
Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah. Pretty close to that.
Now, the plot for this, this is the most probably in-depth plot George Lucas could have came up with. A small child wants to be a pod racer, and he's actually abducted by an adult male who is a Jedi, and This movie starts with a title crawl that explains what every Star Wars fan wanted for the last 25 years. They wanted to see a story about trade, taxes, trade blockades, politics. This is what they wanted to see. This is what George Lucas delivered for us. It starts with two Jedis, Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi, going to this blockade set up by the Trade Federation with His Holiness Newt Gunray.
Newt Gunray was very central to the story, by the way. So basically they go to this Trade Federation blockade, which is right above the planet of Naboo. So I guess within Naboo, there's the Gungans, who are this weird, I don't even know what kind of, they're like this weird alien race that spawned Jar Jar Binks, who is the best Star Wars character ever. Then we have the Naboo people, the human race, which kind of are on the surface, and then the Gungans live underwater. I guess they can swim, but they also kind of appear on land too and just annoy people. The Jedi pretty much encounter the Neimoidians, who are, I guess, the Trade Federation people. Basically, the Neimoidians, they have this trade blockade going up over Naboo, and so the Jedi kind of figure out what it is because it's almost like laid out for them, and then they go to Naboo, and then they encounter the greatest character in Star Wars history, Jar Jar Binks. And I'm not sure why George Lucas decided to include this character. He was trying to maybe bring, like, I guess more merchandise or marketing to kids in 1999, even though we did not need this. Jar Jar joins the two Jedis on their journey, and he ends up getting caught in a few different situations, but one thing I kind of found a little weird was they end up going to Naboo, and it's weird, like he shows up and says hi to people, and then they almost treat him like he's done something wrong, or he's like maybe this mysterious character that we don't know too much about. I don't know, what did you think about that?
About Jar Jar? George definitely went too far in a few places. The character, like you said, the character Jar Jar was created because, I don't know if it's confirmed, but George definitely saw the merchandising potential of Star Wars and how he become a rich man, a billionaire, but making movies that can sell merch, which he definitely pulled off. So even straight from George, he said that this movie, or the prequels even, they're for kids. They're meant to be for kids and for kids to enjoy it. And we're gonna hire some actors that are gonna be questionable, but pull off what George wants to do.
I mean, this, like, in all seriousness, this movie has so many things wrong with it. Just from a writing standpoint, like I've talked to you about it before, I feel like George, I don't know if I had seen it online, but I'm pretty sure even in like different portions, like, cause I think he wrote all the scripts for the prequels, but I think even Revenge of the Sith, someone had said that he maybe even did it in like one take. So he like wrote the whole script in one take. And I don't know, The Phantom Menace just seems like it was written by like a high schooler. Even though like George was probably in his 50s when this movie came out. And I think he had like a good idea for the movie, but just his directing style is really bad. And I think he's kind of known as like an armchair director where he's not very forward. He's not like, he doesn't interact with his actors very much. Like he might just say like, okay, do this. And in The Phantom Menace, like all of the acting is so stale. Like even from Liam Neeson is a great actor in my opinion. I think he's one of the best, but he's gotten a little typecast lately too. Some of those actors, like Natalie Portman was just starting out. She was probably only like 18 when this movie came out. Okay, that's fine. She hasn't really grown into her own as an actress. But then there's like the really bad child acting, like with Jake Lloyd, which we could talk for hours about that specifically. And even Ewan McGregor, just hardly any emotion on any of these characters' faces. Like some of the CGI characters had more emotion within their characters, and they're not even human.
I don't know why that happened, where like you said, the human characters are very monotonous. Their voice and their acting is very monotone. The CGI characters were the ones that actually showed some acting chops. Like the voice actors for the characters were very good. Watto, Jar Jar, even Jabba the Hutt had more emotion than all these actors. Which is not a fault to the actors. I believe it was the directing style that George had told them, I want you to be speaking like this first, whatever. Maybe he envisioned that in the future, everyone's going to talk like this. The Jedi level, a few thousand years from now, everyone's going to be like, he must stand trial.
But at the same time though, aren't the Jedi are supposed to have like no emotion really, like they're not supposed to form attachments, like they're not supposed to show emotion. They're almost like monks.
The Jedi, yes, but what about everyone else?
The one thing I didn't understand is so the character of Palpatine, Sidious, he was really good in the movie. But that's just Ian McDiarmid is a great actor. But Liam Neeson is a good actor, Natalie Portman is a good actor, Ewan McGregor probably became a better actor after that movie. He was better in Attack of the Clones and he was better in Revenge of the Sith. I think he maybe just was trying to figure out what was going on in that movie. It was just a disaster on the acting front. And some of the little extra characters, like Captain Panaka, who was like Padme's personal guard, he was awful. It's just the way he delivered his line, just there's a part in the movie where him and Obi-Wan are on Tatooine, and they're just talking, they're just standing there, and all of a sudden Obi-Wan's like, storm's coming, and then he's like, yeah, it's pretty bad. What does that have to do really to advance the plot, besides show us how bad these actors are?
I mean, that's the way George wanted, that's the way it happened, so while these actors probably had their careers ruined after this movie, other than, I'd say a few of the main ones, Liam Neeson, Ewan McGregor, Natalie Portman, they all kept going. Jake Lloyd, he got pretty messed up. Like you said, the CGI characters are just so good, in my opinion. Compared to the regular acting, Jar Jar, you can't get away from that. There's an animal who farts in Jar Jar's face. You can't get away from that. Boz Naz, the Gungan leader.
The Star Wars meme community just shot forward after this movie came out. There's so many memes of just little parts that happen within this movie, and it's just absolutely incredible. Like you mentioned, all these CGI characters, Watto has so many memeable parts, Boss Nass has memeable parts. Like you mentioned, that animal just farts in Jar Jar's face for some reason.
Very memorable, yeah. We had taken some notes when we were watching the movie, and I think I had I sent you the list. There's probably 40 or 45 timestamps I sent of just memeable lines that were just totally cringe, or just you could laugh at the lines. So the dialogue in the prequels in general, and especially this movie, were just totally laughable. Which in 1999, I think I was 7 years old.
Yeah.
So back then, watching it, wow, to me as a kid, I was like, wow, this is great. I love Jar Jar. I love pod racing. I like this little kid, Jake Lloyd. This is what I want to see as a kid. So George Lucas, he hit the ball out of the ballpark for that. This kids movie, this is what I liked.
That's the thing. I mean, marketing it towards kids makes sense, because as a kid, you're not going to know that the plot is bad. You're just going to see pod racing and lightsaber fights. You're not going to realize the bad acting and the bad script and the bad directing.
I was reading some things actually about the pod racing and how a lot of the main character Anakin, his pod, and also in the later movies that the starship is also yellow. It's a representation of George Lucas's life, because George Lucas used to race cars when he was in his teen years, and he was just a street racer, and then eventually got into a really bad car accident. He almost died. So in that car accident, he decided, I'm gonna make some movies. And that's what propelled him to make the original trilogy. Once he had made the original trilogy, he's like, these are some good movies. He's like, you know what? Now I'm gonna make these movies about my life. I'm gonna show my life and what I miss about it.
So George is Anakin?
George is Anakin, and
Wow, this explains a lot.
this is just us theorizing now. Maybe George is Anakin, and this whole career was like the pod racing was him racing in his younger years. Attack of the Clones, he was getting older, but still, you know, being very edgy. And then finally he had his crash in Revenge of the Sith, where he got his legs chopped off. Not in real life, but metaphorically.
So George just killed a bunch of kids?
Basically, which was himself. He was the kid.
He had to kill that form of himself.
Exactly. And then
Wow.
Revenge
This is
of
like
the Sith,
poetry.
It rhymes. This is actually what happened here.
I mean, looking at it in a deeper way, I mean, that makes sense, man. It's kind of sad when you think about it. I think that actually kind of goes more into like how he had like a lot of yes men in these movies, like in the prequels specifically, and especially in the Phantom Menace. Like it just seemed like go on YouTube and look up these videos like behind the scenes, like people working on like makeup or prosthetics or writing or maybe executive producing or working on matte paintings or working on anything. Like it seems like no one really questioned George on his decisions. He'd say, I want to do this, and then like maybe people thought it. They didn't want to question it because it's like, George Lucas, the god, you know, like I can't question George or I'll get fired. And yeah, they're like you watch it on YouTube, they're like people that look like they're scared for their jobs. It's like a normal person at their job listening to their boss talk to them. I think that's one of the reasons that the prequels failed. I think the reason that the original trilogy was good is because George had a lot more help from people. He had distinguished directors helping him, like Richard Marquand and also Irvin Kershner for Empire and Jedi. And I know George directed the original Star Wars movie too, but apparently he also had a lot of help in the editing bay from his ex-wife. He almost like maybe felt like he could just do this all himself, you know, like he's like, I don't need anyone's help, like I'll do this all myself. He's not a good writer, he just struggles on that. Like you need to realize what you're good at and just like get people to help you with that, you know?
There's so many parts of this movie that are questionable in so many regards. And part of that's the CGI characters with their, I want to say, typecast or stereotypes. It's a bit weird why he's done this. Do you think this is racism for George, or he's just like what? What's going on here?
I think a little bit, man. I mean, you can get away with that in 1999. Imagine if he made these movies like in 2021.
Oh yeah,
he would have
no
gotten
way.
canceled. Yeah, I do agree with you. I think he's like, it's like his way of like thinking things are funny, but like he wants to include all these different races, and then it really comes out super racist when you actually watch the movies. We should also talk about how bad the CGI is.
Watching it now, yes, the CGI is just awful. It's really bad, but some of it's like, well, for 1999, it's pretty good. How'd you feel about it?
It's like you mentioned, you know it's from 1999 and you can just tell. It just annoys me, like especially so many like green screen and blue screen things. Like George was obsessed with like doing almost everything green screen and blue screen for the prequel movies, and there was hardly any real sets. Like I think the Phantom Menace actually had the most real sets in all the prequels. In Revenge of the Sith, I think there's like maybe 1 or 2 real sets in the whole movie. And they actually, I know they went back to wherever they filmed it. I think it was South Africa, Tunisia, I think, something like that, to go and film the Phantom Menace, where they did the filming 20 years earlier for the original movie. That actually looked fairly good just because it was still it was real sets and stuff. But then like almost everything else was fake, and you could tell. I mean, it's just like so many of the droids looked really bad, and they kind of made those better in the later prequels, but like they kind of perfected those droids in like The Mandalorian because there's better CGI now. It's hard for me to watch it because I'm already so jaded from how bad the story is, and I'm so jaded from how bad the acting is and how bad like the script and everything and directing style is. And George does this weird thing too, like this is kind of unrelated, this is more like cinematography stuff, but like you've probably noticed it. He is obsessed with like the front shot and then just like an over the shoulder shot and then like reverse. So he'll do that for almost every single speaking part. And there's hardly any urgency within like a lot of the speaking parts in the movie. Okay, there should be something like people are running or something, but people just start walking. You know, there's no urgency within it. And it's really bad within the other prequels as well, like especially Revenge of the Sith. It seems like every single talking point, it's just people walking down a hallway or something, or on a couch or something, and you watch the behind the scenes, and George is just on his chair.
On the couch.
He's like an armchair director, man. Like he doesn't really go up and direct the actors very well, and I think that some of the actors that were younger really struggled with that too.
Back then, it's like watching this movie, even now, they follow George's style with like even the sequels now. They just follow his style because that's Star Wars, and they have those stupid like transition effects that you can do on Windows Movie Maker where it's just like a circle going. So many little things that seems very basic for a filmmaker, like to make this kind of movie. There is one redeeming quality to this movie. If you can sit through the whole hour and 40 minutes of this movie, there is a final lightsaber battle that makes this whole sit through of this movie worth it. What do you think about the final Jedi versus Sith battle?
I really liked it. I mean, it's a little different because like the older I get, the more I like the original trilogy a lot. Because I mean, you can complain about the way that they filmed or shot the Obi-Wan versus Vader fight in the first movie. Like it's slow, like nothing really goes on. They just hit their lightsabers back and forth. There's no jumping or anything like that. I feel like there was more urgency in that movie compared to like any of the prequel movies because you know what's at stake. They got a little better in like Empire, they got a bit better in Jedi. But then in The Phantom Menace, I still love it, but it's very choreographed. You know what I mean? And I love the character of Darth Maul. Like I think he was one of the best parts of the movie, but he's only on screen for like 4 minutes of the whole movie or something like that. And he's become such a he's like a mysterious character, and I feel like that's why people like him. He's almost like Boba Fett. Like I feel like Darth Maul was the Boba Fett of the prequels because like you don't know anything about the character. They flesh out his character more in the Clone Wars, but people liked the character of Darth Maul because it's like, oh, we don't even know where this guy came from, like what he's doing. You know, we know he's a Sith. He could fight. He's got all these moves. You know, he's an amazing duelist and stuff. The lightsaber fight at the end probably saved this movie from being like a 10% and like elevated it to be like probably about 50% for me, because it's just cool. Like imagine seeing that as a kid. It's a first lightsaber fight where people are like really jumping around. You know, like Empire had that a little bit, but you can't do as much with it. But like Ray Park, who plays Darth Maul, he actually really perfected his lightsaber skills. And I mean, Liam Neeson was I found him a little rigid. Like just watching him, yeah, he was a little older. He was kind of just did the stereotypical moves, nothing too special. But Ewan McGregor, like you could tell, even like later on in the other prequels, like he was building up his skill set to become a better lightsaber fighter. The ending lightsaber fight was probably the thing that saved the movie for me. I
think that as well. There's one more thing that I think the lightsaber battle, but also the music in the movies. It really pushed this movie way up. Like there'd be scenes where it's just some really bad dialogue happening, but the music is just like really epic, really well done, and you're just thinking, wow, this is like really setting the tone right now for this movie. And it just really pushes the scene up, even though the scene is really bad. And with the lightsaber battle, the Duel of the Fate song that's playing when they have this final climactic lightsaber battle, the battle is cool as it is, but then the music on top of it makes it even better. So from like you said, from like a 10%, 20% movie, it becomes like a 50% like passable, like, yeah, I'd watch it again just to see that last battle, right?
Yeah, and I feel like most fans might just watch that ending lightsaber fight because they like it. You know, like I feel like most Star Wars fans aren't gonna be like, I'm gonna go rewatch The Phantom Menace, you know? Like I've never really talked to anyone that really likes the movie too much unless they're, you know, like as a kid or something like that. There's so many problems with this movie. There's so many issues, and I mean, for what it was in 1999, I guess it was something. And I'm sure people liked it, but then when they rewatched it, they probably didn't like it as much. I mean, imagine going to the theater in 1999, not seeing a Star Wars movie for 16 years, Return of the Jedi, 1983, you go to the theater, like, I bet most of the Star Wars fans were kids when they watched the original trilogy. They're probably like in their 30s, they're going to see The Phantom Menace, the first real Star Wars movie in 16 years, and then they go to see it. Oh.
One thing I want to talk about in this movie is actually Yoda, and in the original release of this movie, Yoda was actually a puppet, and he looked, in my opinion, pretty haggard when I first saw this movie when I was a kid. Like, watching it back now, they actually replaced Yoda with CGI, and in my opinion, I think they actually pulled it off way better than the puppet, because now Yoda is actually consistent between 1 to 3, and he looks more like 4 to 6 as well, even though of course 4 to 6 he's a bit older. He's way more consistent, whereas I think in the original puppet for episode 1 he looked maybe older than the original trilogy. What did you think about his CGI?
He somehow managed to look older than he looked in like episode 5 and 6. It was weird. The way they designed the puppet was just completely wrong. Yeah, I agree with you. The CGI Yoda actually looks good. It's probably one of the main CGI parts that actually looked good, and I know they probably spent a lot of money to actually make him look good. There's actually a scene where it's Obi-Wan is talking with Yoda, and they kept it in where it's just CGI. I think it's CGI of old Yoda, like the puppet Yoda, but he's walking. But they still kept the CGI of how old he looked, and it's just like a back shot, and they didn't take it out for some reason. But then they do a close-up, and it's just CGI. It's really odd. There's so many like little changes. Like, we could even talk about like the special editions of Star Wars, which completely destroyed a lot of things even in the original trilogy, but they added a lot of odd things. Like, they added some weird extra CGI characters to the pod race that looked completely out of place in my opinion. I don't care about this. Like, I really do not give a crap about this character. Why should I care? And George just may have gone too far in a few places. I mean, he seems like a guy that's very obsessed with like including way too much CGI, but I also thought it was maybe like the special edition was his way of almost telling the fans to screw off.
And George was saying because the technology had progressed so much since the last movie that had released in the '83, he said, okay, we have all this technology now, we need to cram as much as possible into every single shot of this film. So he crammed as much as he could. There's like hundreds of things going on in every shot. Finally, when he's like, oh, now it's 10 years later and there's even more technology, it can add even more after it's done. There's so many scenes where it's like, what was the point of that? There's like a CGI character when they're about to have the pod race, and Jar Jar is down in the pit for some reason helping out, and then it just farts in Jar Jar's face for no reason. But you're like, what? They spent money to make this character fart in Jar Jar's face? There's so much other stuff they could spend the money on.
It's so dense. There are so many things going on. That was actually what one of the producers said, Rick McCallum.
It's so dense.
It's like sometimes less is more in these types of movies, right? We don't need people's eyes to be looking all over the place, like figuring out what's going on. Like, we want people to be focused on the main characters, right?
The only redeeming quality of this plot that I would say would be the plot of Sidious/Palpatine pulling the strings from behind the scenes and playing both sides. He was playing the Trade Federation, he's playing the Republic, and fighting them between each other to push his own agenda to basically take over the whole thing. I think the story, the overarching story of this whole episode 1 to 3 of Sidious taking over everything and becoming the Supreme Chancellor is actually really good and really interesting as it stands by itself. But the way that it was executed was not so good. I think one of my favorite scenes is when Palpatine reveals that his real name is actually Frank in the Phantom Menace.
I must be Frank, Your Majesty.
I also wanted to talk about a really funny portion that happened in the movie. I believe it's Nute Gunray, who the Jedi are within, I think they're stuck in one of the rooms and they release some gas in there. And then basically Nute Gunray's like, they must be dead. Destroy what's left of them. Which literally makes absolutely no sense. If they were dead, why would they go back in to destroy what's left of them? They're already dead. I don't know, I have so many questions about, I would love to talk to George about his thought process for this movie. I have so many questions.
I do think that was just a stupid plot device that was used by the writers and of course George to get the Jedi out of that room on the starship, get out and then show the greatest special effects in history, which was the Force Run, Force Speed. Another thing about this plot that didn't make too much sense to me was that they had certain times in the plot where they would be spoon-feeding us as the audience exactly what the plot is, what they want us to be feeling, what's going on. Basically really shown in the section of the pod racing. There was these, I guess the race announcers, they had like 2 necks, 2 heads, but the race announcer, and as the pod races happen, they just keep cutting to them. They're like, oh, Anakin's in trouble. And then like, okay, I knew that already. And then you see him like avoid a rock. He's like, oh, he almost got killed there. It's like, okay, thank you, I know that. But they're spoon feeding the plot so I guess the kids can understand what's going on, because sometimes, kids are kids, they're not the smartest. But then after all these scenes happen where they're literally telling us how we should be feeling, what's going on, they cut to the political scenes of this movie in like the Senate, and they're having these political discussions talking about trade, taxes, and they're using bigger words that kids wouldn't understand, and talking about like sovereignty and how all these politics will affect all these planets and how the leaders will go all these places, and it just like it doesn't make sense. Like, of course we understand it now.
It goes back to George not knowing how to write, really. There's the people that are like, oh, this movie's for kids, but then there's the Senate parts, the political parts, like, how is this for kids too? Like, the pod racing's for kids, but then there's the Senate part. He was trying to maybe like appease a few different ages of people, I think, and he may have gone too far in a few places.
More than a few. Thank you for watching, young Padawans.
If you have any other movies you'd like us to discuss, let us know in the comment section down below.